Hey guys, this is BBZ for BBZStaking, and today we've got something really special. So Connor was able to forward us the hands that he played on the final table from the Sunday Million so that we can get into what we're most interested in for part 2 of that part 1 series that we did featuring Connor in this tournament. So don't want to waste any time. With that, we're just going to get right into it. So Connor gets dealt ace-6 offsuit on the button, okay, and elects to just rip it. I think with these stack sizes and the ICM pressure that the other players are feeling, this is the best play. And so I would totally agree with this line. Winds up opening king-9 offsuit to 2.2x on the cutoff and equally standard. No objections. I think most people would find that. He winds up jamming here for 20 effective roughly with the big blind and small blind from the cutoff with pocket 4s. Again, I think with the ICM pressure these players are feeling, this is the best play. So, no objections. I think this is very standard. If you're not doing this, if this looks non-standard to you, or if you're afraid of the risks that you're taking, I think this is a much better line than your alternative answers in this scenario. This is where it gets a little creative, okay? So here Connor opens 10-7 offsuit. And so what's going on is he's leveraging the two 6 million chip stacks to raise first in with a wider range and pressure the other 3 players in the hand. This is certainly a wide open. I would assume that he's making a lot of money doing this in game. I wouldn't tell him not to do this. He's got a post-flop skill advantage. He's got a pre-flop skill advantage. He's probably got opponents who are playing too tight. And I think this is probably okay as a mix. The big blind does call, who checks the flop. Very standard from the big blind. Connor elects to c-bet, I think equally standard. He chooses about a quarter pot. Big blind check calls. Turn pairs the 4, and Connor elects to check. I think checking was totally reasonable. I do think he could have barreled. I don't think the big blind has much in the way of 4x in particular. I think the big blind's probably playing tighter than that in this scenario. So as a result, the 4 is mostly a brick. If anything, given how wide Connor's opening, the 4 might be an asymmetric advantage that belongs to Connor. So I mean, he could have bet, but I think checking a lot and checking mostly is going to be the play. But I think a non-zero bet is reasonable. The 10 of spades is a drawback. It's a meaningful bad blocker. You block hands that when the board pairs will fold, like 10-9 or Jack-10 or maybe Ace-10, although Ace-10 will probably call twice. So it's it's not perfect, but it's for bluffing. It's not perfect for bluffing, but I think you could non-zero bet the turn. And he elects to fold versus bet on the river, which is what I would have recommended for sure. Min raise pocket aces, take it down pre. Not exactly what we're hoping for, but it's okay because we know we win the tournament in the end anyways. Defend 7-4 offsuit against the cutoff open to min raise. I think that's pretty standard. You can get a little bit tighter if you want. It depends on how aggressive and what type of bet sizing strategies the in-position player is likely to deploy post-flop. Most players aren't deploying aggressive enough post-flop strategies and certainly aren't deploying big enough sizings. And so these types of defends end up being better than they're probably supposed to be. So we whiff the flop, but we have a somewhat interesting hand with some semi-interesting backdoor draws. So Connor elects to check raise. And this is a flop where this is reasonable. It's not an equilibrium play. It's not like a GTO play, but 2-betting this type of flop is a very high frequency line to take. It's going to make up most of Connor's counter strategy, at least half of it, but probably most of it, potentially all of it, depending on exactly how we model things for our opponents. So when Connor decides to not fold, mostly raising is going to be the play, or raising a lot at least will be the play. This hand's obviously a bit optimistic, a bit on the gangster side, a little thuggy. This play is also probably very effective and likely to make money against the way that Connor's opponent is playing. So I'm fine with it. And yeah, Connor's opponent does choose to fold. So I am fine with this line. I'm actually going to give you guys just a quick math exercise that can help you understand why something like this that might look so crazy is actually quite reasonable. So I would expect that Connor's opponent is probably playing something like a 100% c-bet to this flop. He's probably betting most of the hands in his range, which is usually not a very good idea. It's probably not a good idea against Connor here, but it's nonetheless likely to be happening. And so when Connor elects to raise here, he's betting about 2.6 million and the total pot becomes about 6.7. So Connor's risk is 2.6. When he wins, the pot will be 6.7. And so Connor only needs to win the hand 39% of the time, roughly, to make this bet viable, okay? And what that means, the consequences of that, are that Connor's opponent needs to be defending 61% of his betting range here in order to counter Connor from doing things like this. And while that's very standard for me, if I were in Connor's opponent's shoes, that's really not something most poker players are very comfortable with, defending 61% of their betting range on the flop against a check raise. And so in this, and particularly on this in this tournament, in this scenario, when Connor's got a lot of chips and the other guy has a lot of chips, and this guy's probably betting too much, I think this line is probably quite reasonable. So I don't fault Connor for taking this line. I think it's probably good. It's almost certainly good. It's probably making lots of money. I think this hand might even mix non-zero, although it's probably close. So I like this. Pretty good. Connor winds up shoving the small blind with queen 9 offsuit. I think pretty reasonable, pretty standard. Nothing wrong there. Ends up opening king jack suited, takes it down, defends queen 8 suited. Winds up betting when check 2 from the big blind. So this is the type of flop that when Connor doesn't 3-bet and doesn't fold against a min raise pre-flop, it's the type of flop he's going to have some meaningful interaction with. In particular, there will be some density in Connor's range around 9s, 10s, 8s, like jacks in particular. I mean, Connor can certainly have like some ace high hands, but some of those might shove pre-flop at this stack depth. Connor can have some pairs, which some of those might shove pre-flop at this stack depth. Some of them might not, but some of them might 3-bet call. And so, like, you know, there ends up being that Connor ends up having a 3-bet fold range as well, usually using some kind of high card polarized component, like king 6 offsuit or something, for example. And so you know, this is the type of flop that when Connor elects to just call, he's going to have some meaningful interaction with. Connor's hand has very little in the way of what I would refer to as equity leakage. So if Connor bets and he gets check raised off of this type of hand, Connor has basically nothing. But when Connor bets and gets called, the hand is likely to develop in a way that allows Connor to continue betting, and so Connor has backdoor straight draws to the 6, the 7, the 10, the jack, etc. So he's also got an overcard in the queen. So I think this is a pretty reasonable bet, although he could have checked. And this speaks to kind of the nature of the situation from my perspective. And Connor can choose to continue betting here. He doesn't have to. He should probably check non-zero, but barreling fairly often in this type of a scenario is going to be appropriate. And I think his sizing is totally reasonable, so this seems fine. And you can see that what's happened is Connor's bet just under pot, a little over 60% of the pot on the turn, and he's going to be betting just under pot on the river had he elected to bluff. And Connor elected to give up on a 6, which I think is not unreasonable. And the reason I think it's not unreasonable is because this bet sizing on the turn is unlikely to interact with the 6, and the 6 actually does counterfeit a not insignificant component of Connor's betting range on the turn. So a hand like 5-3 just got counterfeit. A hand like 9-3 or 9-5 looks a lot less attractive now. So it's not unreasonable to shut down here. It wouldn't have been unreasonable to continue bluffing either. You need to bluff here with a non-zero fraction. Connor doesn't block bluffs, but most of Connor's hands won't block bluffs. So, you know, I think he could have bluffed the river. I don't think he had to bluff the river. I think giving up is reasonable. And Connor's opponent had a boat, so Connor's 6 cents pays off. We raise the ace-jack offsuit, take it down pre-flop. Not too interesting. Big UTG player shoves for 4.5 big blinds, and Connor makes the call. This is probably a little bit closer than it looks, although I think it's still a call. But it's probably a little bit closer than it looks. It's starting to feel dicey to me. So at 3 big blinds, we call with any 2 cards. And at 4 big blinds, as long as he's shoving wide enough, this is a snap. I would almost never fold against most people. I don't know, for some reason I feel like this guy's just tight. So I mean, I think calling here normally is going to be good. And I hadn't seen this hand before. And I don't know how coincidental it is that this player shows up with 7s. I think I saw the replayer, and I probably got a feeling for how this guy was playing. And I've been playing this game for a long time, so that kind of information sticks in my head. So it just felt like this guy was much tighter than he was supposed to be. But I do think that's Connor's play is like the only real reasonable answer. And okay, so Connor opens the 10-6 offsuit. Again, this speaks to just how wide Connor is opening. And so Connor's really leveraging these 2-5 and this 5 and 6 million chip stack to pressure the other players that are remaining to act. And this is not an equilibrium open, I don't believe. Even if you were, like even in an ICM adjusted model with this type of a distribution, I think Connor's range will have a hard time getting past 50% for raise first in. So I don't think this hand would really qualify as being an RFI, but he's beating them up. And I think beating them up is probably good. I think they're unlikely to fight back or do something about it. I think Connor can navigate in complicated situations against these players more than well enough to compensate for the fact that he's opening wider. And I think he's likely to make direct profits from how tight they're likely to respond. Okay, so he ends up c-betting ace-jack deuce. I think that's a pretty reasonable answer. We have really good blockers for c-betting. It's also a high-frequency c-bet board in general against the big blind call, so that seems fine. And Connor does choose the kind of high card, low card, polarized 3-bet strategy that I mentioned earlier. The hand specifically that I mentioned earlier was king 6 offsuit. Connor here 3-bets with jack 2 offsuit. I think this is reasonable. Again, a little bit on the gangster side, but again, still reasonable. I do think with the distribution like this, it's likely to be much more dense ace X offsuit and king X offsuit when Connor 3-bets. The reason that I think that is because Connor really can't have, in this type of a distribution, a wide or expanded 3-bet calling range. Even though they're blind versus blind, Connor really doesn't want a 3-bet call pocket 10s. Even though they're blind versus blind, Connor really doesn't want a 3-bet call pocket 9s. Those hands are likely to be either calls or shoves, more likely calls. Even hands like jacks don't look great because it's just so much equity in this type of a scenario with this type of a distribution to 3-bet and then get 4-bet by a range that mostly looks like ace high hands, like suited ace 5 or ace king or ace queen or ace jack offsuit or whatever. You don't really want to run it with this type of equity in this type of an ICM scenario, even blind versus blind. So you really have to think about that before you make this type of a 3-bet decision, that this type of a 3-bet is very exploitatively grounded. It's not going to be supportable by Connor's value bets. So what does that mean? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that basically when Connor 3-bets here and calls a shove, so when Connor 3-bets here and calls a 4-bet jam, he has aces. He has kings. He can probably have ace king suited. He might be able to have ace king offsuit, but I'm not sure that's a good idea. And he can have queens probably, although I'm not actually sure that that's a great idea, although it's probably fine. So as a result of that really narrow 3-bet value composition, you can only 3-bet infrequently because you only have a few value bets to support the 3-bets. And the way to 3-bet is through duplication, which is duplication. The idea of duplication is that you're going to try to duplicate those value bets to some degree. That way your opponent can't say, oh, you only have pocket aces, I have an ace in my hand, I'm going to shove and you're always going to fold. So given Connor's narrow 3-bet value range, I would say that the 3-bet bluffing component should be using the strategy of duplication to bluff. That the strategy should therefore be grounded in hands like ace high and king high. And that this jack is an exploitative play. This jack 2 offsuit is an exploitative play. And the assumptions Connor needs to make when he chooses this is that basically this player is going to fold too much, either now or after calling this bet and then on the flop. And I don't know if that's reasonable or unreasonable. My baseline assumption is that that's reasonable, which is why I think Connor's play is okay. But I still think mechanistically, when you're playing poker at a high level, you do want to understand what you're doing, the consequences of what you're doing, and how it should work. And so hopefully, this is able to illustrate those types of principles, and I'm able to explain that well enough that you guys can get it. And so Connor really can't call with many hands here at all. And so Connor ends up folding. And that's the first time I've seen that hand. I hadn't played that hand out. So it's cool that it worked out that way because it helps support my, the example I gave you guys. So hopefully you guys found this video interesting. Connor plays extremely well. He's a BBZ graduate. He came up with me in the beginning. I flew him out from the UK to live with me. I love the guy. He's one of the super users of online poker in 2019. And, I really appreciate him getting us these hands so that we could go through them together. And then, I hope you guys can subscribe below to the YouTube channel. You can check us out on BBZStaking.com. Check out some of the videos that we've put up. We've been putting out a lot of new content recently. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook. And, really just, I appreciate all the support that you guys are giving us and hope you continue to follow along. And we're able to entertain you as well as help you to develop your poker game. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.